Thank you very much, everybody. It's a great honor to have Prime Minister Mark Carney with us. As you know, just a few days ago, he won a very big election in Canada. And I think I was probably the greatest thing that happened to him, but I can't take full credit.
It was a remarkably friendly trip to the Oval Office. And while Donald Trump says he helped Carney politically, is Canada any better off after the two men met? I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on the House, former Quebec Premier Jean Charest on what's changed and why he says Canada may, in fact, wind up thanking Trump. Plus, what's up with the Conservatives? Is Pierre Poilievre's leadership safe? We'll get the scoop. And tough losses. The outgoing MPs trying to come to terms with election results. What makes politics worth it? And what needs to change? But first, will that White House visit transform the Canada-U.S. relationship? The House is now in session.
You're a transformational president, focus on the economy with a relentless focus on the American worker, securing your borders, ending the scourge of fentanyl and other opioids, and securing the world.
Transformational. It's a word that's open to interpretation. Prime Minister Mark Carney survived 33 minutes in the Oval Office with President Trump and the eyes of the world on them both. The president repeated false claims about subsidizing Canada. He said America didn't need Canadian cars. He repeated his 51st state taunt, to which Carney said, never.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
But along with Trump's taunts, compliments for Mark Carney, yet a refusal to back down on tariffs. So, how will that moment affect the trade war and Canada's economic future? Jean Charest is the former Premier of Quebec and former Deputy Prime Minister. He's also on Prime Minister Carney's Council on Canada-U.S. relations. I spoke with him Friday morning. Jean Charest, welcome back to the House.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
Mark Carney said during the election campaign that the old relationship with the United States was over. Given what we saw this week, how would you describe the new relationship with the United States?
Well, it's still a question mark of where we are going to go, but I think at this point, all of us are just relieved and impressed that we are now re-engaged with the administration, with a new prime minister. I thought the meeting in Washington was actually very good, and obviously Prime Minister Carney was well prepared. The line about the White House, I was concerned that Donald Trump would answer, yes, but you burned down the White House in 1812 and ask for reparations. But Prime Minister Carney was very well prepared, and there was one single objective that overwhelms everything and overarching, and that was to re-engage at a level where President Trump would be, I think, respectful of Canada, move beyond the 51st state remarks, and move on with the job of settling the relationship. So I think we're there. What I also liked is the reference to USMCA, because we do have a framework. It is a full-fledged trade agreement. It's not just a deal, and we can work off the basis of that. It's a very good starting point. It brings order and to the process, but it's tricky, and I agree with the strategy of saying let's go fast and re-engaging in a process and go slow on making sure that we get the best agreement possible and not let ourselves get to be an outlier relative to other agreements the Americans will negotiate.
Was there a moment where you wondered if this was going to go off the rails? I was nervous watching as a Canadian.
We were, and we were chatting earlier about people literally coming up to me on the street, Catherine, and saying, "Tell Mr. Carney not to go to the Oval Office. It's too dangerous." I mean, but that says something about the state of mind of Canadians as they watch all of this process. We were all because it is Mr. Trump, we're all on the tip of our toes. But I thought it went very well. And I thought the Prime Minister was very well prepared, not just in words, but in tone. And keep in mind with President Trump, a lot of it is about tone, and this is the old rule that, it's tone from the top, the leader, but this is even more true for Donald Trump. The tone that he has in engaging with other leaders will determine how they will be treated and how they'll get things done, and the tone was exactly right on both sides.
After the meeting, Trump's new ambassador to Canada told the National Post, quote, "From my standpoint, from the president's standpoint, 51st states not coming back," adding, "that's behind us." Do you believe the ambassador?
Well, he's an ambassador and an optimist. I haven't met him yet. Well, I expect it will from time to time reappear, but there's no one, Catherine, following the president on this in the United States. There's no serious commentator. I haven't seen a single commentator say, "Hey, this is a good idea. Why don't we do this?" So at one point, I think in his entourage, they're just going to say, let it go, and let's move on to the real issues we have to address with Canada. And the ambassador's in a difficult position of having to manage that. The other part of it is that I think they may start measuring the impact it has on mobilizing Canadians, which isn't in their interest. Why would they do this? So the other part of the meeting I find interesting that was not mentioned but is in the background is the G7. Mm-hmm. Prime Minister Carney will be hosting the G7 in Canada-U.S. in a few weeks. And if you're Donald Trump, you want a chair of that meeting because the chair determines a lot on the way the meeting will unfold and content and who will be there and not. I think you want someone there who is going to be friendly to President Trump. So I think that's part of the story also.
Well, and the last time Donald Trump came to Canada for a G7 meeting, I think we all remember that wound up going ultimately pretty poorly for Canada. Trump left in quite a snit. And so I wonder if you feel that there's the same level of precarity that we just saw this week when Donald Trump comes back to this country.
Well, I think there's lessons in the meeting that happened in Charlevoix, and we should not allow it to go sideways. I think Charlevoix was sort of very harebrained in the sense that it was Angela Merkel, it was Prime Minister Abe of Japan. You remember the famous picture? They all looked like chaos. This time, I think Prime Minister Carney, especially given his background in international affairs and the preparation, has the ability to have an orderly meeting. And mind you, part of the meeting is the people and the other leaders he will invite to the meeting, including Vladimir Zelensky. Mm-hmm. So that could be a big part of the story. And President Trump, rightfully so, will want a chair that is going to be friendly in the sense that it's certainly not hostile to him, which we don't want to be. We want the president to be able to have his say and to advance a number of issues.
I do want to ask you about Canada's economic future in all of this. Mark Carney has indicated that Trump is ready to go into negotiations with Canada. What do you think that could look like?
Well, it could be re-engaging on the basis of USMCA, which also means, or CUSMA, as the way we call it, which would be a negotiation with Mexico, which I think is what we need to do. We need all three of us to be at the table and then start engaging on the issues that the American administration want to address. One of them will be content of the automotive industry. Even though he says he doesn't need cars or he doesn't need any, we all know where reality is. And the economic reality of what he's doing is also weighing very heavily on the American administration. So there's a number of issues there. And then, but my anticipation, Catherine, is that we're probably looking at what some would describe as a grand bargain. I know Mexico was there very early on. And what do we mean by that? An agreement that would be beyond CUSMA, include security, include the Arctic, and include defense, and allow President Trump at the end of the day to say, well, I won, I got all these things. And because it's a broader conversation, broader issues, that gives us much more maneuvering room, much more pieces on the board to be able to play with to obtain an agreement that satisfies all sides.
But it presumably takes longer. And if I'm an auto worker listening to you say this right now, Monsieur Charest, maybe I'm worried about the time horizon on that.
Yes, it is, and I think everyone's very aware of that. The big consequence of what's happening to us now is volatility, uncertainty, for which there is a price. There is definitely a price to pay. We're seeing that as you and I speak this morning. Over the last few hours, we've had the numbers on employment in Canada, and they're not good. And they don't tell a great story. So, yes, but everyone's aware of that, and we'll want to move as rapidly as possible to get whatever carve-outs we can in the meantime to ensure that there will be, that they're protected. And the Prime Minister has been very clear that any money generated by counter tariffs, for example, will be channeled back in support to workers and businesses.
Let me ask you quickly, Mr. Charest, about you. Our colleagues at Radio Canada reported that the Carney team wanted you on board. Could you play a bigger role, you think, in the future of this Canada-U.S. relationship?
Well, Canada is very well served now. Just a word about how lucky we have been to have a team of public servants in the Privy Council office, because I saw them at work and in the embassy in Washington, including Ambassador Kirsten Hillman. I mean, sometimes you get lucky. In the political instability, there was a great deal of strength, bench strength, and wisdom and work done by those teams that we should be thankful for. I'll help in any way I can, but I don't have any, plans to return to public life. And I just want the country to do well. I like you and others. We want the country to get through this. And as we come out of it, maybe in 20 years from now, we will thank Donald Trump for having forced us to have a hard look at our economy, our federation, a hard look at what role we want to play in the world. And if I had to sum it up in simple terms, we have punched over our weight for a long time in the world. We've sort of punched under our weight in the last little while. We have to return to a position where we play a more important role in the world.
Okay. Monsieur Charest, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Jean Charest is the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. So, a lot of strategy and planning go into the meetings like the one we saw this week, and the Canada-U.S. relationship will also help shape the new cabinet the Prime Minister will unveil on Tuesday. For some insight into what goes on behind the curtain, Brian Clow is the Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and was the lead on Canada-U.S. relations. He's been part of several meetings with Trump. And Gary Keller was the Chief of Staff to John Baird when he was Foreign Minister and the Chief Parliamentary Advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Thank you both for joining me.
Great to be with you.
Good to be here.
So what is the most important thing that happened during that Oval Office meeting, at least the part of it we saw? Brian, I'll start with you.
It was the Prime Minister's handling of a very chaotic and unpredictable president.
Gary?
That the meeting happened, that the Prime Minister got away unscathed, and that there seems to be basis for a future relationship.
One thing that was noted this week is, Justin Trudeau's first meeting at the White House with Donald Trump actually went pretty well, all things considered, too. But of course, we know that relationship changed over time. And Brian, I wonder, you were on those last calls between Trump and Justin Trudeau. We know it's been reported in the media there were times that Trump was using profanity. How intense, how bad did it get?
So you're right. More often than not, the interactions between Justin Trudeau and President Trump were positive and constructive. But there were tough moments as well in the first term and certainly in the last few months. In those final calls, they weren't all tough and difficult, but the discussions around tariffs, we were so far apart. The Prime Minister made very clear and strong arguments against the tariffs, and the President didn't like that. In particular, the President did not like that Prime Minister Trudeau was committed to retaliation and following through as he did.
And when you get to the point where Donald Trump is swearing, if not at you, certainly in front of you, what lesson do you take from how rocky things got, Brian?
Well, for awareness, the instance of profanity was not at the Prime Minister, I would say. It was about an issue that he felt Canada was taking advantage of the United States. He got very exercised about that. What lesson do I take from those interactions? One, you've got to try your best to have a good relationship with the president, and I think Mark Carney's gotten off to a great start on that front. but it's not entirely in the hands of the Canadian Prime Minister. It depends what version of Donald Trump shows up, and sometimes he comes in hot.
Indeed. Vladimir Zelensky can attest to that. Gary, after the Oval Office meeting, there was a working lunch as well as another meeting, according to the official agenda. One senior government source, a Canadian source, said Trump, during those meetings, asked Carney for his opinion on a lot of different issues, was interested in what he would say, particularly on foreign policy issues. The Canadian side found that very encouraging. What do you make of that kind of reflection on the meeting?
Well, I have to take a little bit of grain of salt with that. How much of this is spin coming out of it? How much, would that be part of a normal conversation? Was this a political source? Was this a public servant source? So, look, it sounds like the initial meeting, it was job accomplished for Mr. Carney. He had to go in there. He had to make the case. They preset the agenda so that, like I said, they weren't making massive expectations coming out of it, and they have something to build upon. And that was the key deliverable out of this. Look, Mr. Carney said during the beginning of the election campaign that the relationship as we know it with the United States is essentially over. Well, that did not come out of this meeting, in my impression. That was a line for an election campaign. Look, will Mr. Carney have a different relationship with Donald Trump than Justin Trudeau did? Absolutely. But this is the start of a process. And as Brian said earlier, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. There will be good moments, there will be bad moments, but it's a 4-year discussion. And, quite frankly, we have I think a parliament that is fairly stable, and that it wouldn't surprise me if the length of this current government coincides very much with the length of President Trump's term.
That's interesting. I wonder, in terms of looking forward, is there one thing in particular that you're looking to see next, Gary?
Will there be any short-term deliverables? Will there be some sort of future meeting coming out of it? The other thing I would say that's very positive are the sounds coming out from the U.S. ambassador, new U.S. ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who has said very, I think, positive things. I'm not sure that the president will stop talking about the 51st state, despite what his ambassador says. But I think actually having him here is a very positive step, because he seems like another adult in the room that if you can't deal with the Trump administration or the principal himself, you'll be able to deal with somebody who seems to have a level head.
Interesting. Brian, we saw that the UK announced, if not a deal with the United States, sort of a plan for a deal regarding tariffs. Right. Is there a lesson for Canada in what the UK did?
I think everyone is still digesting and interpreting what that deal is and what it means for everyone else. I would say I'm a little concerned at the deal that was struck and the precedent it may set for what the United States thinks it can achieve from other countries. The fact that the UK agreed to a 10% baseline tariff, that's certainly not something I think the Canadians would agree to, or they want to get back to zero tariffs, USMCA rules. And if the United States thinks they can get countries to agree to baseline tariffs, I think that's a problem. But we'll have to see in the Canadian talks how quickly these move, as Gary said, and how big it is. Is this going to be a negotiation that includes every conceivable issue under the USMCA, or is it going to be contained to a few issues and security issues?
I want to turn to cabinet, because that is the next step in all of this. Gary, we saw some cabinet ministers go down to Washington, D.C. with Prime Minister Carney on the couch in the Oval Office. I'm thinking particularly of Dominic LeBlanc and Melanie Joly, who we know have developed or are developing relationships with their American counterparts. Does that mean that Mark Carney kind of has to keep them in similar roles in his new cabinet because they've formed these bonds?
Well, I think if you're sitting with Prime Minister Carney on the couch in the Oval Office, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be maintaining the role that you had previously or currently. So yes, it's valuable to have those people going forward as part of your team. Like others, will be very curious to see what kind of mix of cabinet comes forward. I expect it'll be a similar sized cabinet going forward. But what new talent does Mr. Carney bring to the table to help reset the relationship on a lot of fronts?
What's the most important thing for him to do? Is it to add some fresh faces? Is there a particular, or it's a role like the foreign affairs minister becomes the most important thing?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if he has a specific person who is tasked with U.S.-Canada relations, will he create a special portfolio that embraces some of that?
Didn't work out so well when he tried it with Chrystia Freeland. Sorry, Brian.
Didn't work out so well with Madam Freeland, and he, reiterated his displeasure.
We should say the previous Prime Minister. Should be clear.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. But if there's somebody who's new to cabinet that is a fresh face, there are some names out there that would certainly fill the bill, and to see if they have the ability to hit the reset button, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Brian, what are your thoughts about the new cabinet?
I think the most important thing for the Prime Minister is to put people in roles who can deliver and people who he trusts. There's a lot of new faces out there. I'm sure he has spent the last few weeks getting to know a lot of the newly elected MPs, if he didn't already know them. And to me, putting solid performers in these roles is the most critical thing.
We said at the beginning, sort of lift the curtain here, and I appreciate that having worked in a Prime Minister's office, there's a lot you have to keep confidential. But what's one thing you can tell us about what goes into making a cabinet that people might be interested or surprised to hear?
Yeah, it's first and foremost, it's about putting together the best team to deliver for the country. But it's also one big human resources exercise. It is, in a way, the caucus is a workplace, and you, the Prime Minister, are making or breaking the dreams of your team members. And that's a lot to consider. You can make a career, but you can also devastate someone if you pass them over. And over time, I think we've all met members of Parliament who feel pretty dejected at not getting that chance to serve in cabinet. So all of these things go into considerations for a Prime Minister.
How long does it take to figure out whether or not you got it right?
I don't know that you ever fully know that it's gotten right. But in my experience, cabinet making that I've witnessed, it goes right up to the deadline. So now we know the Prime Minister will swear in his new cabinet on Tuesday, and I would expect there may be some final decisions and tweaks being made as late as Monday. And there are various reasons for that. Sometimes you might think that a person is right for a role, but then they may not get a sterling security review, or they may have a conflict for a particular role if their spouse is overly involved in a sector that interacts with a ministry. So the exercise of getting it right goes right up to the last minute.
A science and an art, it sounds like. Listen, thank you both so much for your insights today. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Great to be with you.
Brian Clow was the Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Gary Keller was the Chief of Staff to former Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird. Lots more coming up on the House podcast. When people say, why does anyone even want to get into politics anymore? Well, 4 departing MPs have some thoughts on what makes it so meaningful and why leaving politics behind is so hard. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House. Making politics make sense. Tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca.
Thank you very much, everyone. Back to work at caucus today after the most recent election. Obviously, we didn't come out on top, and that's disappointing, but there is a lot to be thankful for.
Pierre Poilievre's tone was different this week, perhaps humbled, as he took questions from reporters on Parliament Hill before heading into a meeting with Conservative MPs. His party increased their popular vote. They increased their seats, but they still lost. And Poilievre lost his own seat. So what happened behind those closed doors, and just how much do the Conservatives want or need to change? Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter at the Globe and Mail. Steph, thanks for joining me.
Hello.
Hello. So we heard a bit there of what the Conservative tone sounded like publicly. MPs I'm talking to are not necessarily, though, all in, I would say right now, on Pierre Poilievre. What is your sense of how they're feeling?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when you listen to Poilievre, just as we did in that clip, you can hear the forced smile. It's almost you can hear this willingness that I've got to put a positive spin on this. But what really struck me coming out of that caucus meeting, going in and coming out, was a moment, right? That was a moment where caucus could have, every single one of them, stopped in front of a microphone and said, hey, I really support Pierre Poilievre. Or, hey, think of all the new MPs they elected. And they could have said, hey, look, I'm proof that our message was good. Our message was strong. We didn't get any of that. And that's confusing to me. I don't understand it. Caucus there had a moment. I understand they want to keep things behind closed doors. They don't necessarily want to, nitpick in public. But even the public backing of Mr. Poilievre's message wasn't really there.
I heard two different things from the Conservatives I spoke to. One was actually a fair bit of enthusiasm for what happened in that meeting. They felt like there was a good discussion behind closed doors. But I'm also talking to people who are saying, like, well, let's give Poilievre a bit of time and see what he does with it. That he, right now, they're giving him a bit of rope, but that is not necessarily infinite. I wonder if that is what you're hearing too.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the room was that it was a lot of folks sort of detailing, okay, this is what happened in my riding. This is how it went for me. These are the deficiencies I identified. And there was a lot of listening and a lot of nodding and a lot of mm-hmming. And where caucus is okay, boss, what are you going to do with all of that?
Yeah.
And it's funny for a party that ran on change, is their top line narrative there? Like, what kind of change? Are you going to be the change? What? And lingering underneath all of that, right, is this question of, yes, the party probably made campaign-related mistakes, but what if this is all about Pierre Poilievre?
Well, and I'm so interested in what's going on with him, like that tone we just heard. Obviously, we can't be inside his mind, and he's somebody who keeps his confidences pretty close. Has he been humbled? I mean, losing is really hard on politicians. We're going to talk about that more later on in the show. So is there some genuine contrition, exhaustion, or is this about, okay, people are expecting me to sound a little fewer hard edges? Whether this is something he feels he has to project or something that is really an internal change that's going on.
A little while ago, his wife did a podcast, Anna Poilievre, and she talked about sort of the things they read and what they're into. And he's into the Stoics.
Yes, I've heard
right?
this. Mm-hmm.
And he's into that Stoic philosophy of you can't control certain things. You just have to respond to them. You just have to power through. Again, some of that was his campaign narrative, right, as he related to Trump. And so I wonder if that's really informing him right now. And does he have, in that Stoic philosophy, is there room for introspection? Is there room for ownership? And it's interesting, right? Because Conservatives take personal ownership, personal responsibility very seriously. You are responsible for your choices, your decisions. What we didn't hear from him is, I am responsible for this. I own this. He never said that.
Fascinating. Okay, let's talk about what did happen concretely in that meeting. The MPs adopted the Reform Act, right? So this now gives them the power to potentially trigger a vote later on and change the leader if they so choose. How significant is that?
It's significant if you cast back a little bit and you think about the 2019 election and when Andrew Scheer lost that election. Because after that one, when they had their caucus meeting, it was a deliberate choice not to vote in favor of the leadership review because it was seen as if we do this, it's like saying we don't support him. Now, this time, they've opted for that. It's worth noting that when that bill became law, I guess, Pierre Poilievre was the minister in charge of it. And so what's he going to do? Stomp all over caucus and say, thou shalt not? But it does, create the appearance anyway that he's on probation. And probably that's a good signal to send. And if caucus does, in fact, at some point say, okay, you know what? No. Then they have the right.
You mentioned Andrew Scheer's name. How significant is it that he is, in essence, a sort of interim opposition leader?
I think it's them banking on this is going to be a short run for him in the House of Commons, possibly only the June weeks that they're sitting. He obviously has Mr. Poilievre's trust. He's part of the inner circle. The question is, how much does that give Mr. Poilievre a bit more freedom, right, to leave the House? He is a creature of the House. Like, where is he going to go? It's so interesting, this dynamic.
Before I let you go, I do want to talk about the other name that is sort of hanging over all of this, which is Jenny Byrne, Pierre Poilievre's campaign manager. You have reported there's frustration in caucus that is directed towards her. At the same time, I hear her name didn't actually come up very much, if at all, behind closed doors. What is going on there?
It's a great question. I mean, the inference, right, is that they lost. She's the campaign manager. So her and Mr. Poilievre wear this. They absolutely have to. There is a challenge, though, because so many people see her and Mr. Poilievre as so melded into one political brain.
People have said to me they're the same person.
Yes, and you can't have one without the other. I don't know if that's necessarily true. But when I go back to this question of, are they going to learn? Are they going to change? If you're criticizing any element of the campaign, you don't need to say Jenny Byrne's name out loud. if, you felt the target seat program wasn't run appropriately, that they ran ads too late, that the war room was in disarray, and now I'm not talking about her management style or how she dealt with you. I'm talking about the actual of the campaign. That's on her. The question is, okay, Mr. Poilievre kept saying we're going to broaden our circle, I believe is the phrase. What does that mean? He's going to have another advisor? But I guess going back to what we were saying earlier, that's why that caucus meeting is so confusing to me. It was a moment for MPs to put a tangible list of demands in front of Mr. Poilievre, and it doesn't sound like they did. And so if they're not approaching him with specifics, then what power do they actually have to affect any change or to get what they want the next time, which is a win?
It's fascinating stuff, and you are always on top of it. Thanks so much, Steph.
Thanks.
Steph Levitz is a senior reporter at the Globe and Mail. Tuesday, the political world will watch carefully as Mark Carney reveals which MPs will join his new cabinet. But this week, quietly, MPs who lost the last election have been packing up their offices and saying goodbye. It's a raw, emotional time, but it also lays bare why some people are willing to make big sacrifices to be in political life. Here's a look at the lessons from hard losses.
There's nothing left. All the folders have been emptied. My assistant left his ID, the keys of the office too. And the House of Commons team are coming in just to be sure that everything is on the list, to make sure that I'm not living with anything belonging to the House of Commons.
Sticky fingers. They don't want you to steal anything?
Yeah, of course.
For 5 years, 6 months, and 8 days, Julie Vignola was a Bloc Québécois MP. The former teacher represented the riding of Beauport-Limoilou in Quebec City. This campaign, she expected a tough fight with the Conservatives. But on election night, the Blociste came in third behind the Conservatives and the Liberals.
At around 10 o'clock, I knew, I hoped that I was wrong, but I knew that I was not an MP anymore, because the advance vote polls were likely in the favor of the Liberals, but I had to remain positive and smiling all night long for the team. And at 1 o'clock, when I saw the journalists were arguing between each other today, are we asking her to make her defeat speech? And I said, okay, no, that's it. It's been 3 hours that I've been knowing that I was losing the riding. So I said, okay, pull the plug. Wait.
Staff from the House of Commons are trying to get Vignola's office ready for the next occupant, so we have to step into the hall to get out of their way. What I really want to ask you is, how are you?
Nice. Okay. Sad, but serene. 5 years of passion, but the hard stuff is not here. The hard stuff is in the writing. All the 1,200 and more people that I feel that I left behind.
Some judicial recounts still have to take place, but right now it looks like more than 40 incumbent MPs lost their seats. 2 floors up from Vignola, Nova Scotia Conservative Rick Perkins is also trying to wind down his office.
We're on the 5th floor, and almost all the members of Parliament here got defeated. Me, right beside me, Michelle Ferreri, Dr. Stephen Ellis. Down the end of the hall, a Bloc member who was there lost. Peter Julian, Jagmeet Singh, Lisa Marie Barron for now, all lost.
Perkins' first experience on Parliament Hill was as a staffer when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister. It It was only in 2021 that Perkins won the riding of South Shore St. Margaret's. And in his office, there's certainly a piece of that riding right where the coffee table should be. Is that a lobster trap?
Yeah, it's a huge lobster trap on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in my riding. When I was elected in 2021, I was elected primarily by the fishermen in my riding, 7,000 of them, and they gave me this trap to bring to Ottawa to remind me who put me here.
As Perkins shows us his mementos, I ask how he's making sense of his loss. It seems to help that he's not alone in it.
I guess there's a bit of camaraderie. So we lost 8 sitting members of Parliament, including the leader, lost his seat. And we lost sort of not a random selection in my view, but front benchers is what we lost. There's, I guess, a little solace in knowing that really lots of really good people lost. If I had lost by 12 votes, I would have been really angry because, I could have knocked on 1 or 2 more doors and maybe changed that. But when you lose by thousands of votes, it's like, I'm not sure there was much else I could have done.
As soon as the results were known on Tuesday morning, I congratulated the incoming MP from my riding and offered to help out on any transition. That's important.
For more than 20 years, Peter Julian was an MP in the House of Commons. In recent years, he was the NDP's House Leader and represented New Westminster Burnaby in BC. But he too was defeated in the election by a master's student who was only 4 years old when Julian was first elected.
We were the closest NDP loss. And I reflect on 987 people who voted for me in 2021. If they'd stayed with us in 2025, it would have been a different result. Now, this is democracy. Every election, you anticipate the worst and you work for the best.
Liberal Mark Carney is also trying to process his defeat after 10 years as an MP of his Northern Ontario riding. He too is trying to see the positive side of the election results. But it's hard.
For me, it was positive because we went in my riding of Sudbury East, Manitoulin Nickel Belt from 64% of voting in 2021 to 70%. So that's positive. But the negative side of that is a lot of misinformation, a lot of lies.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I was a target smear campaign by the gun lobby. They circulated photos of me with Pinocchio nose that I was, because I said I was supporting hunters to make sure that hunting rifles weren't banned, and I still obviously believe that. But the gun lobby convinced a lot of the hunters in Northern Ontario and I guess across the country that the Liberal government is banning their hunting rifles, which is not the case.
When I listen to what you're saying, I wonder if are you mad, Mark?
No, I wouldn't say mad. I mean, I think this is a wake-up call. I think, and I'm not challenging the results of the election, but I am questioning why those individuals didn't want to debate when I met with them. They had their mind set, because I've heard, the corruption, Trudeau should be hung, all these just massive conspiracy theories that are circulating, and we don't seem to have a way to counter-react that message.
As they pack up, the ex-MPs reflect on the most meaningful parts of their political lives.
The first time I succeeded in helping someone in his citizenship, he has been waiting 3 years over the delays. And we succeeded to resolve his case. And other cases on the same thing, a man who has been waiting for his wife for 3-4 years, finally got his wife with him. They came to my office to thank the team and I. That was magical. That was magical.
The feeling you get when you've helped somebody and you know that people, an MP who was less engaged wouldn't have gone that extra step. That feeling is unbelievable, that you've made that difference. And I see that at the local level, the kinds of cases that we've managed to get resolution on, where we've helped those people. People with diabetes, like my constituent Amber, pays $1,000 a month. And within a few months, that diabetes medication and devices will be covered. So it's such an honor and a privilege to make a difference in Canadians' lives.
For Rick Perkins, it was his parliamentary work uncovering problems at a $1 billion government clean tech fund. The Auditor General would go on to find Sustainable Development Technology Canada violated its own conflict of interest policies 90 times. The government wound up freezing funding and making dramatic changes.
Never in my dreams, when I was at the 2 a.m. sitting in this office trying to cross the dots of the individuals involved in the $400 million that got taken, according to the Auditor General, to conflicted investments by the board members, did I think that it would actually end up as a fundamental privilege motion in the House in the production of documents, which led to Parliament being frozen for all of last fall. That's the longest debate on a privilege motion in the history of Parliament. The previous one had been 18 hours, and this was from September through December, and led to the prorogation of Parliament, essentially. That obviously didn't result in people in my riding saying that guy should be reelected because he exposed that kind of corruption. But, you know, I always say there's always surprises in elections, and I just happened to be one of those surprises in the election. I didn't think it would be me.
Of course, there's that fundamental tension of Parliament, the government and the parties whose role it is to offer loyal opposition. Yet Perkins says what he'll miss most is the people, across party lines.
Brian Massey is a close friend of mine with the NDP, 20-year MP. We served together on the industry committee, and he's a really good guy. He was a fantastic MP. Actually, we talked 3 times during the campaign. I had the challenge that I was the only riding in Canada without an NDP candidate. I phoned up Brian to help in the days beforehand, and Brian spent a lot of time in the middle of his campaign trying to help me to make sure they had a candidate in the riding dealing with their national campaign. So
I just want to be clear about this. That's pretty striking. Somebody from the NDP ultimately tried to help you, your chances in the election. How do we make sense of that?
Well, and Brian actually said, whatever quotes you want from me, Rick, to put on your literature to help you out and endorse you, I'm willing to do that. Just write me up quotes so that the NDP and the riding know that you're okay. So I get a little emotional when I talk about that, because that's the kind of relationship you can develop if you truly believe in what you're doing and you treat with other MPs with respect. And it's the one thing I learned from my boss, Barbara McDougall, when I came here as a young, hard partisan, that members of Parliament are elected to do a job, and I don't care what party they're in, you have to respect that role and help them do that job.
Peter Julian feels Parliament could do with a whole lot less partisanship.
It's a good thing when it's a contest, a debate on ideas. There are differences between the parties. That's something that should be expressed in Parliament. But there are so many times when we could rally together and get things done that will actually benefit people. And often the partisanship stops that, blocks that from happening. Often what one party will want to do is take credit for something rather than working with all parliamentarians to get these things done. We could do a hell of a lot more. The procedures, the rules that will govern us allow us to do things within a few moments if we have that consensus. And I'll give you the example of the ban on conversion therapy. A profoundly homophobic practice that was decried by all parties. And we passed it unanimously, so we got that done.
You passed a motion that said that it was not acceptable for people to practice this. Yes.
We passed the bill to ban conversion therapy. And yet, Erin O'Toole suffered the consequences from members of the Conservative caucus that then said we shouldn't be working together on this shouldn't have passed, and ultimately he lost his job. We could do so much more if all members of Parliament came forward with the idea that first and foremost, their loyalty is to Canadians, their loyalty is to build a better country. And if we put aside the partisanship, we could pass bills every week.
Conservative Rick Perkins insists parties do put partisan interest aside in times of crisis. He points to 2023, when his own riding struggled with historic wildfires and he worked with the Liberal government.
Bill Blair called me the night the fires broke out. He was emergency preparedness minister then. I probably spoke with Bill 3 or 4 times a day during that week while I was in the riding. He was extremely helpful in getting us the resources that we needed to fight those fires. And when Bill Blair acknowledged in press conferences that I was his eyes and ears on the ground, and I made a statement from the fires in the House of Commons, and I mentioned that Bill Blair had been extremely helpful to my community. So the lines blur between parties when you're trying to fight for your community.
The more sinister side of political divisions in this country is one of the things that sticks with Liberal Mark Carney.
I was physically assaulted. A person came into the writing complaining about my signs and complaining about some of the anti-mandates that were in place before, and just started to yell and scream, and we said it's not acceptable. But then she hit me, but that aspect of the doxing of addresses, my home. There was protests in my home. My signs were completely destroyed. A lot of graffiti on the signs, obscene gestures, Nazi symbols on the signs. That takes its toll on a personal life. Ex-wife couldn't handle that, and protest is a home. So that's difficult to take. And when you're a member of parliament, you're not home half the time. You're in Ottawa, so she's alone and concerned. And people don't realize that personal aspect that comes in. And I think we got to find a way to get back to a more civilized conversation, exchange of ideas, because it is concerning.
When I hear those stories, which are pretty upsetting, I wonder if you leave politics with mixed feelings about having been an MP.
Oh, no, not at all. No, I'm proud. No, I'm proud of the work. I mean, it's something that wasn't there in 2015, 2019, for sure. The pandemic has changed that dialogue. I do it again. I mean, the personal aspect, I try to figure out a way to deal with my personal life a bit differently. But from a career perspective, an MP perspective, you got to put your neck out, and there are consequences to that.
Everything's about relationships, I believe, in life. And I'll miss those people. I'll miss that work, right? This is not the best paid job I've ever had, but it's the best job I've ever had. I've had a long private sector career, and I've had a very successful one, but it doesn't give you the same sense of personal value that you're doing something. You know, shareholder value is a value, but it doesn't bring the same sense of commitment and net worth that you're helping people out and helping your community out.
I really liked what I did. I have to still conjugate in past now. So this is the end of a chapter, and we'll see what I will write in the next one.
The boot will be the last thing. It was the first thing I unpacked when I moved in to my constituency office. So there's a symbolism in it being first, but also it being last.
MPs who lost their seat only have a few weeks to pack up and leave. Peter Julian is sorting through 20 years in public office. On his windowsill is a single work boot. The other boot is in his constituency office in British Columbia.
That's my last pair of steel-toed work boots from my factory floor days when I worked as a laborer. And so these boots are still very, very good, and they help to keep me grounded on what's important. My work has been to make regular people be the ones that are the focus and the priority of the federal government.
What are you going to do with the boot now?
I'm unemployed for the first time since I was 12. Depends what job I get, but these may come in handy.
Okay, that's it for us this week. Our crew on the house is Kristen Everson, Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and intern Emma Stewart-Kiss. Our senior producer is Jennifer Chevalier. Thanks also to Caitlin Crockard. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.